Yeah. So how can you become conversational in French, even when you're a beginner? There's a quick way of becoming conversational in French. And when I say being conversational, I mean finding your words in French. So I know that's the goal of almost all French learners because they come to me and they tell me they're struggling. They're struggling to speak even when they know French words. So why are you struggling to find your words in French? So mainly because of one mistake, one big mistake, which is also a very widespread mistake. In 2 words, vertical learning. That's evil, and that's deeply rooted in our learning habits. And that's not even your fault. Almost all the methods of language learning are based on vertical learning. So usually you don't even get to choose. So what am I calling vertical learning? What's vertical learning? It's vertical as a list. So it can be a vocabulary list that you learn by heart, a list of words around a theme like the animals, the dog, the cat, the horse, the penguin, etc., or the colors, or the jobs, the clothes. That's the worst way of learning vocabulary. It can also be a vertical conjugation table. So I walk, you walk, he walks, she walks, etc. Again, that's also the worst way of learning conjugation. So we say it's vertical because that's how we usually see it. But what vertical actually means is that you take a theme or a part of a field or part of a language, like the French language. You take a part of it and you do only that for a while, nothing else. So you learn by heart 10 animals or 20 animals in a row. The dog, le chien, the cat, le chat, the horse, le cheval, the penguin, le pingouin, or le manchot actually, but that's another story. And you end up with 10 animals in your head. Then you take another part of the French language that you also isolate like a French verb, and you just learn a page of a grammar book in the right order. So I, you, he, she, etc. So not the right order, meaning the good order, but a straight order, a dogmatic order. As if the French language was not a living language with so many interactions between ideas and words. That's heartbreaking. So you spend a lot of time learning this way, different parts, and then you try to combine the different parts to make sentences. And you realize that it's difficult. It's really difficult, and you're struggling. And of course, with that method, you're struggling. But now you can respond that that's what we do in all other fields. When you learn mathematics, history, or physics, or business, you take a part of that discipline and you go deep into that specific part and you try to master it. And then you do the same with another part, and that's how you become an expert. So in a way, that seems to make sense. But in language learning, vertical learning really does not help to make sentences. But why is that? Why does vertical learning prevent you from learning to speak? Because first, it's really slow. You spend too much time learning a rule without practicing, without making any sentence. Even if you're doing an exercise right after then, it's too late. You've already lost time. Because learning a list or a conjugation table is a huge interruption during which you're not practicing making sentences, when you're not speaking. And you know, when you waste time because of an interruption, you also waste the time of getting back into what you do. Second, because of vertical learning, you miss most of the consistency of a language. That's why it's difficult. You can have the impression that you're learning because you're struggling. You see many different new things, so you have the illusion of learning. But the difficulty to learn makes it very hard to speak after then. And you feel that there are so many exceptions, that there's no consistency, just because you haven't seen it, because of vertical learning. So you can't gather your thoughts when you need to speak French. And that's how you lose your motivation. So what's the solution? If it's not vertical learning, then it should be horizontal learning. But what's horizontal learning? You can find several definitions of horizontal learning. A broad definition of horizontal learning is when you keep a focus on a field while keeping a good sense of that field in general. So in language learning, horizontal learning is when your first priority is how to make whole sentences. So not necessarily long sentences. Of course, when you're a beginner, you start with short sentences. But what's important is that you start with sentences, even short ones. So that can be only subject, verb. She goes, she walks, or she lives. But that's how you get and keep a good sense of the language you're learning. So the first obvious advantage of horizontal learning is that you make sentences straight away. For instance, you start with she goes, elle va. That's what I do with my students. Va is what we see in the English word invader. There are many bridges between English and French that you can use. But now, instead of going through the whole conjugation table of to go from I go to they go, you keep on going with she goes, elle va, and you add to Paris. So you learn that to a city in French is actually at a city, à Paris. So you can say she goes to Paris. Elle va à Paris. So you see, you learn a bit of conjugation and a bit of location words with à, and not all the location words in a row. And that's even the occasion to learn French pronunciation. Because there's no pause between va and à. We say elle va à Paris. A long à with a stress at the end. Elle va à Paris. She goes to Paris. And in order to make you experience the consistency, then we group all the pronouns with which you say va. So, he goes to Paris. Il va à Paris. We go to Paris. On va à Paris. You go to Paris. Tu vas à Paris. With tu, the verb always gets a silent S, so we'll also get it with the next verbs we'll see. And only after then we introduce I go, which is slightly different. Je vais à Paris. I'm going to Paris, or I go to Paris. Then instead of introducing you go with the plural you and say, be careful, it's completely different, you go is vous allez, we just keep on going with negative sentences in spoken French. So she doesn't go to Paris. Elle va pas à Paris in spoken French. And then we learn the ways of asking questions. Does she go to Paris? Elle va à Paris? So just the statement with the intonation of the interrogation at the end. Or est-ce qu'elle va à Paris? And we'll have the time to get back to you go with the plural you and they go. But we already make sentences in French, and that's what is important. You just learn how French sentences work, and you're much more able to say these kind of sentences when you need them. So I'm not doing the whole course here, but then you can easily learn to say how are you in French because it uses the verb to go. It's how are you going actually. You also learn to talk about the future with to go, because using to go in French is the most common way of talking about the future in French. So basically, that's what horizontal learning is about. That's how you internalize the French language. You see that it's really a new way of considering languages. And another advantage of horizontal learning is the wow effect. Because you quickly realize that you can start to speak French. You're already speaking French, and even when you were a beginner some minutes ago, and it's in your head. That really reinforces your motivation, your joy. So you are in the perfect state to learn when you really like the process. And that's often what my students tell me. They enjoy the lesson, they have fun. And when you're happy to learn, your learning is much more efficient. So I hope that I convinced you about horizontal learning. I mean, to help you to avoid a huge disappointment if you keep on vertical learning. Just know that you can end up knowing French rules, but you'll be hardly able to do anything with these rules. And that can be very frustrating to know so much without being able to speak. That's why I wanted to talk about horizontal learning. And if you're interested in going further, you can try a free lesson with me. You just have to go to the link in bio, leave me a message, and we'll arrange that. Bye bye.